These files were never meant to be public, but someone reopened them. This is the Dark Bureau. In the churning pre-dawn darkness, a ship pushes away from a bustling commercial port, trailing the humming promise of anonymity. Its hull wears a new name, some hastily painted pseudonym stripped from maritime records as recently as last week. The flag fluttering at its stern is foreign, unremarkable, and, crucially, freshly acquired. Outwardly, it is another vessel braving the world's oceans with essential goods. But this ship has an identity as elusive as its mission. Maritime logs show discrepancies. Port officials recall vague paperwork, cargo manifests stamped with commodities that never existed. And as it moves toward the open water, the ship's transponder flickers for the last time, its digital presence erased in the uncertainty of the Strait of Malacca. Official records insist it carries grain, yet deep below bulkheads lies an unregistered cargo of crude oil, an illicit trove valued at around 60 million subject to stringent international sanctions. Once the ship blends into the open sea, all trails, paper, radar, financial, fragment into dead ends, each branching into a handful of possible destinations. What seem like random vanishing acts are in fact choreographed, a feat of calculated orchestration, not chaotic luck. Behind this single vessel operates an infrastructure that stretches around the globe, a clandestine shadow system, rendered invisible by complexity, that engineers breaches in the very fabric of maritime oversight. Global sanctions regimes are constructed as if they are final and universal barriers, a web of law, enforcement, and oversight, built to choke the flow of prescribed goods. In theory, an embargo is a lock that cannot be picked, yet every year billions of dollars worth of oil, minerals, and rare materials are spirited away from embargoed countries under the protection of what insiders grimly call ghost fleets. Rather than being isolated incidents or blunders lost amid the haystack of global trade, these escapes are evidence of a self-sustaining underground ecosystem. This is not the work of lone opportunists. It is a matrix of state actors, clandestine shipbrokers, professional accountants, registries who overlook violations, and a network of legal and illicit intermediaries. Flags of convenience, cheap, loosely regulated national registrations available to anyone with money, are among the network's most precious tools. Maritime investigators estimate that hundreds of tankers now flit through the world's grey zones, carefully obscuring ownership and chains of command. What started as rare circumventions of the law have metastasized over the past decade. Today, ghost fleets constitute an alternate parallel supply chain, designed to render embargoes porous and regulation unenforceable. The limits of sanctions are exposed by these ghost networks, which thrive in regulatory blind spots. Every link in the global shipping system is a potential point of evasion. Insurance requirements are sidestepped, compliance checks gamed, documentation spoofed. Vessel names are swapped at lightning speed. Transponder histories are cleansed or scrambled with impunity. Official owners are fronts, nominal directors in quiet European cities, offshore companies reporting to untraceable trusts. Satellite tracking, meant to ensure accountability, can do little when ships simply cease transmitting or muddle their real-time location data. According to research by trade analysts, ghost fleets collectively moved upwards of $35 billion in sanctioned oil in 2023 alone, most of it tracked back to Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. These aren't isolated spikes. They represent a new baseline, an enduring game of cat and mouse. The sophistication of these mechanisms rivals that of many legitimate multinational supply chains, their very existence a rebuke to the idea that modern trade can ever be perfectly regulated. Central to the machinery are the so-called flags of convenience, official ship registrations sold by countries whose own economies are often dwarfed by the tonnage they certify. Panama, Liberia, and the Marshall Islands have become registration superpowers, each responsible for thousands of ships operating far outside their territorial waters. Their allure is clear: minimal scrutiny, rapid document issuance, and little inclination or capacity for enforcement. A tanker can change its flag and legal registration within hours via an agent, erasing past records and donning a new identity for its next voyage. Meanwhile, beneficial ownership is stacked behind layers of directors, shell firms, and offshore trusts. The real power belongs to those who never set foot on board: shipping conglomerates and brokers who route ownership through tax havens, deliberately masking connections to sanctioned interests. A ship unloading at a Mediterranean port may have started its journey technically owned by a company in Belize, then sold on paper to a shell in Hong Kong, all while providing plausible deniability for those ultimately responsible for embargo violations. Prevailing myths about these ghost fleets centre on images of pirates and underworld operatives, but reality is far more ambiguous and more insidious. Crews are rarely complicit saboteurs, but instead ordinary seafarers, recruited under the same agencies that staff mainstream commercial lines. International shipping is an industry reliant on trust, and ghost operators exploit that facade. Contracts look legitimate, marked with familiar institutional names. Many crew members are oblivious to the nature of the ship's routes or suspect only minor irregularities: a missed insurance renewal, a vague set of cargo details. The real risks and benefits are cordoned off, managed by middlemen who handle dubious documentation, devise plausible stories, and scatter payment chains that keep ultimate beneficiaries several steps removed from enforcement. Recruiters and brokers find legal cover in the ambiguity, hiring mariners for routine deliveries and shifting accountability as easily as ship names. Institutional trust is manipulated. A respected recruitment firm or registry lends credibility, disguising illicit operations behind the curtain of routine business. At the bottom, workers are left exposed to legal jeopardy or exploitation. At the top, intermediaries enjoy vast, lightly taxed profits. The financial infrastructure of the system is equally labyrinthine. Shell companies, often nothing more than a mailing address or online registration, pay for everything required to move a ship: fuel, maintenance, port fees, funneling payments through small and mid-sized banks less likely to trigger regulatory red flags. When sanctioned cargo is loaded, proceeds are immediately split and laundered via offshore accounts. Transactions hop from Hong Kong to Cyprus to Dubai in hours, woven through clearinghouses used by legitimate bulk trades. Payment for a single run can net multiple actors millions, squeezed from embargo premiums. The Venezuelan oil sector, for example, has seen at times more than a tenth of its entire annual export volume travelling on vessels untethered to any registered fleet, operated by paper companies, flown under phony flags, and ultimately retired after years of black ops delivery. Many ghost ships are eventually sold for scrap in South and East Asian yards, their ill-gotten gains cleaned and funneled back into mainstream markets, often accompanied by forged compliance certificates. This shadow network does more than undermine regulatory controls. It actively reshapes the global distribution of power and risk. As operational expertise among ghost fleet actors increases, so does the ability of sanctioned countries to resist economic pressure. States under embargo learn from each successful shipment, emboldened by the knowledge that each loophole discovered by authorities merely leads to a new method of circumvention. Meanwhile, a cottage industry has arisen among smaller nations. Registry countries, port officials, and even municipal governments stand to profit from enabling, facilitating, or simply ignoring ghost fleet operations. Some accept bribes or unauthorised fees. Others claim plausible ignorance and reap legal registration proceeds. Enforcement pressure from major powers leads only to displacement, As one region tightens shipping regulation or port controls, evasive routes reroute within weeks, sometimes days, shifting to under-policed regions like the Gulf of Guinea or the Eastern Mediterranean. Private insurers and industry giants unwilling to underwrite such high-risk operations withdraw participation. As a result, the risk is internalised by operators with little regard for safety or compliance. Every highly publicised crackdown triggers a new phase of innovation, closing off old routes and opening unforeseen ones. Maritime investigators rely on a patchwork of forensic tools, financial audits, open-source satellite imagery, informant networks. But more often than not, data trails end in dead ends, erased logs, doctored manifests, or ships that have already faded into the global trade torrent. Peeling back deeper layers, it becomes clear that the strength of this ghost network is rooted not in isolated criminality, but in the cooperation, sometimes willing, often denial-riddled, of legitimated institutions. Regulatory bodies, registry agencies, and corporate service providers become critical nodes. Financial intelligence units struggle to chase leads across fragmentary legal territories, frustrated by jurisdictional mismatches. An entity blacklisted in one country simply reincorporates under another's laws. Compliance officers face institutional incentives to move paperwork rather than meaningfully enforce embargoes. When the Financial Action Task Force identifies and sanctions a particular shell jurisdiction, the industry adapts immediately, registering a replacement company in another jurisdiction before the ink on the blacklist is dry. Announcements from international organisations, the UN Security Council or the International Maritime Organization, trigger only procedural shifts in the ghost networks. Much of global enforcement is built on voluntary compliance and transparency, but when profits run in the tens of millions per shipment, these norms dissolve with little consequence. The network morphs with every attempt to constrain it, anchoring itself ever deeper wherever oversight is weakest. The consequences are systemic and far-reaching. For every ghost ship stopped or exposed, it is estimated that dozens more slip through undetected, each shipment an affront to the intended power of sanctions. The 2023 United Nations Maritime Compliance Report estimated that as many as 40% of tankers with obscured ownership or registration were never intercepted, even as international enforcement redoubled efforts. This failure undermines not only sanctions' effectiveness, but also state revenues. Potential fines are lost, tax bases eroded, and leverage surrendered at the negotiating table. The insurance industry, facing credible threats of catastrophic incidents, collisions, pollution events, hardens its market, driving up costs for legitimate shipping while further marginalising the sector's outlaws. Legal remedies are slow. Cases become tangled in international arbitration, very rarely leading to meaningful criminal penalties. Meanwhile, financial institutions and registration agents often see bottom-line growth from ease of doing business, their reputations taking periodic hits, but rarely leading to dissolution. Critical events force global attention back to the risks underlying ghost fleet operations. Disasters, explosive onboard fires, environmental catastrophes, drastic spills highlight the price paid for regulatory blind spots, both economically and ecologically. Ports like Singapore or Fujairah ramp up inspections and paperwork requirements, but these moves only scatter the traffic to less monitored regions, shifting the risks to poorer countries or coastal communities ill-prepared for the fallout. Human costs are immense. Seafarers left unpaid or abandoned at foreign ports and remote anchorages. Coastal populations who bear the consequences of pollution or oil washing ashore. Whistleblowers and investigators who encounter retribution or endless legal delay. Institutional responses intensify after high-impact incidents. governments hastily propose new compliance programs, international agencies issue updated guidelines, but enforcement engines remain fatally undermined by fragmentation. Each closing regulatory window prompts the system to evolve. Old nodes dissolve, reassembled elsewhere within weeks. Structurally, what emerges is a feedback loop. As sanctions regimes increase in scope and pressure, Ghost Fleet operators respond with greater sophistication. New digital tools, including advanced maritime spoofing, false AIS signals, and coordinated registry laundering, are pressed into service. Enforcement agencies invest in data science and international cooperation, but face the inherent limits of fragmented jurisdiction and limited legal authority across borders. Attempts at multilateral coordination break down over questions of sovereignty and enforcement priority. Each time one segment of the system adapts, fintech, registration, logistics, a new vulnerability opens. The cycle continues. Innovation begets evasion, and evasion prompts new regulatory fixes, with global trade always several steps beyond the grasp of regulators. Ultimately, the ghost fleets hold a mirror to the fractured world order they exploit. Their continued operation invites questions that transcend economic and legal boundaries. Are they the product of desperate states and criminal masterminds, or of a global order that rewards opacity and undermines regulation with its own complexity? Each crackdown, each adaptation, reveals how sanctions are only as strong as the most compromised actor in a vast, interconnected system. Perhaps ghost fleets are less an anomaly and more the inevitable companion of today's economic fragmentation, a shadow supply chain running parallel and sometimes through the mainstream system. In their wake, they redraw boundaries, reallocate power, and force the architects of international order to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of enforcement and the limits of global governance.